Welcome to our shared session on sharing power. It's the time we get into the really juicy stuff, not just the nice, pleasant talks and the painting the pretty pictures, but we're going to really get into it today. I'm glad that you're here to join us. My name is Sarah Pszczepelska. I am here today joined by Ferdinand Mirbach, doctor. Works with the Robert Bosch Foundation in Germany, and Lubna Masoudi as well, works with BIWAC, an entrepreneur who's founded the organization yourself. Be joining us also from Nuuk or Greenland, Kiviok Löfström on the screen. I hope you wave hello to her. Thank you. Here today to get into the nitty-gritty of how do we share power in communities and institutions in meaningful ways? What does it actually mean? We're going to have a little bit of a lightning round just to open up the space of what are we talking about when we talk about sharing power. And then we're going to get deeper into the messy substance of it. Are you ready? Yes. All right. So I'm curious if each of you, we can start with Ferdinand since you're closest to me, what you think about what power sharing means to you in the work that you do. And you will all receive this question. Yeah.
Well, when I think about power sharing, I do it mostly on an individual or organizational level. And to me, there's two aspects when I think about power sharing. The first one is just reflecting about power and privileges. So that means being aware that actually all of us have some kind of power, some more, some less, that's for sure. And it could be about money, it could be about reputation, about networks or things like that. And then, well, being aware of the power and reflecting what that means when it comes to privileges. So being a white man, being privileged over other people, for instance. But that's only the first step, I would say. And the second, probably most important step is getting into action, not just reflecting, but really trying to change things. And I think that's really important because in the end of the day, it's a matter of justice.
Thank you, Ferdinand. What about you, Lubna? What do you think about when you talk about power sharing?
I think there are so many aspects of power sharing, like you've mentioned, the individual one, organizational one. I think I always come back to the systematic and structural one in our societies. So my approach is always the intersectional approach of things. So when I think about intersectional justice, it means dismantling existing power structures and centering the perspectives of the most marginalized ones, the ones who are actually at the moment not in leadership positions, if we keep the global north in mind. For me, it's about shifting the narrative of only a few who are the most privileged are in power, and bringing in more diverse, inclusive diversity and inclusivity at the decision-making table, dismantling the patriarchal and capitalist way of leadership, more away from this individualism, more to this communal decision-making process, more transparency, this.
Okay, so we have someone who thinks about power in an individual way. You think about it more systemically. Kiviok, I'm curious also what you think about when we talk about power sharing. What pops up for you?
Well, for me, power sharing is definitely also a different thing for us as most indigenous peoples. We have a mindset that is collective rather than individual. So if you take that into consideration, power sharing is often looked at as distributing authority or decision-making abilities to a group or throughout a system. While if you look at empowerment in the Western scope, you often think about it as empowering only the individual. But for many indigenous peoples, if you empower the one, you are also empowering the community. So for us, it's a little bit more unclear sometimes whether something is a form of empowerment of a person or if it's a power sharing move for the rest of the collective. So it can be viewed differently based on how you yourself have a worldview. And for most of us here in Galactic Nonat in Greenland, it would be an act of empowerment.
Thank you. I think we will dive deeper also into the distinction between the individual and the collective in power sharing, but also the distinction that you do mention that I'll poke at Ferdinand to go deeper into between power sharing and empowerment. You work in the field of money as power. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about how that manifests in the distinction between power sharing and empowering folks.
Well, I don't totally agree. It's not only about money. That's what I tried to point out earlier. So yeah, I'm working for a big foundation. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, Robert Bosch Foundation. So we are a quite big player in Germany. And of course, money is one of our powers, but not the only one. Might dig on that deeper later on, yeah. But so talking about trust-based philanthropy, for instance, yeah, is a big topic for us for sure. But getting back to your question, so what's the distinction between empowerment and power sharing? Well, first of all, I would say you need both of it, but it's kind of complementary. And to me, the biggest difference between the two is whom are you actually addressing? So when we talk about empowerment, you're mostly addressing those you want to get stronger, but you put more or less all the pressure on them. They need to change. You might support them, empowerment, self-empowerment, however, but still it's them who need to change. Power sharing to me means that you actually address those who are in power, and it is them who need to change. So, as I said already, I think it's complementary. You just need to take both into consideration, and you actually need both that power shifting or power sharing can work.
Thanks. You're talking about a willing actor, both in the empowering context and the power sharing. And quite often power isn't necessarily just shared or given freely. Quite often we have to take power, we have to seek power in order to try to do something with it in the goal of our vision. And I'm wondering, Lubna, when you worked with different marginalized communities and on this systemic level, I'm wondering what kind of power you leverage, existing power, to change the dynamics when some communities have power, some communities do not.
Yeah, I think it's the perspective here really plays a role, the context. Is it about the existing power structures to keep them the way they are, but to diversify it, just to share the cake with a little bit more pieces? Or is it about system change? We really want something completely new and different, and therefore the existing powers are something that we would like actually to dismantle completely. So it depends on which way to go. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong one. So if I think about system change, because this one is not designed for everybody. It is designed for oppressing specific groups so that other groups can benefit from it. So if we think about system change, then I believe that the new constellation of power sharing can exist by empowering marginalized people, but within themselves, because I don't believe in empowering other groups, but each group has to empower itself to create new structures that are outside of capitalist, patriarchal, colonial structures that we have right now. And I always have this metaphor of a tree. There's this old tree with roots. You cannot change that tree, but you can build little trees around it, and at some point we will have a forest, and that tree will be not important anymore, or overshadowed by the new systems and structures that we have. That's the way I like to go. But of course, that's something in the long run, something that will happen hopefully somewhere in the future. But right now, yeah, it's also about how can we invite people to the decision-making table, how can marginalized people empower themselves to not settle. And there's also this experiment of giving people, I think kids and adults, a balloon and tell them, yeah, 1 minute to hold on it for 1 minute. And I'm not, how do they phrase it? Who will stand after this 1 minute with the balloon intact is the winner. So people try to protect their balloons and pop the other balloons. While at the end, they just tell them, if everyone would have just stayed still holding the balloon, everyone would have been a winner. And that is kind of the thinking of leadership and power. Everyone thinks like, I have to hoard it for myself to have that power, while if we are trying to dismantle the existing systems right now, it would be like, everyone can have that power, you know. It's, you're not giving anything up, and you do not have to destroy the other one's power, just distribute it equally.
There's both a mindset thing as well as a practice. Thank you, Lubna. Mindset is very much what came up also, Kiviak, when we were speaking a couple of weeks ago. You are a chair of human rights in Nuuk, and you are also a PhD fellow working very much in the circulation of ideas, of knowledge. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to how you've worked with the dissemination of knowledge around human rights to address the systemic inequalities of the colonial power that you see all around you in the present.
Well, it's not only the colonial context, but life in general that people had no idea what the word human rights meant when I became the chair of the Human Rights Council in Greenland. So that is very scary, that you could ask someone, do you know what your human rights are? And they say, I don't know, what are they? Am I allowed to smoke? Like, so those were they had no concept of it among our citizens. So we immediately started a campaign to tell people about their own inherent human rights, not only their indigenous rights, as you might assume, but the human rights. And the more people became aware of the human rights, the more they became aware of how they were being violated. And because of that, a new form of discussion and a new way of remembering your own word as a human being came forward. At this very moment, 143 women are suing the Danish state. So the Danish state is being sued by women who were violated while they were either very young or when they were children. We have cases down to 11-year-old children that were forced to have an IUD. IUDs in the 60s and 70s were a lot bigger than they are today. So they basically ruined the uteruses of these women, of these girls. And it was to save money. We have papers that showcases that this was a decision by the Danish state because we were becoming too expensive, we were becoming too many in Greenland. So the fact that people had that knowledge since the 60s, 70s, that something was wrong, but they didn't really know what was wrong. But now, because they were aware of their human rights, they were then able to make a case out of it. The same is happening, but this has been ongoing for a lot longer, where 26 Greenlandic people are also suing the Danish state, because in 1914, the Danish state decided that that children of Danish men, the Danish man could decide not to be legally the father, or ensure that these children had no way of knowing who their father was, and they were not able to inherit from that father either. So it's not only about inheritance, not only about the identity struggle, but imagine that you have an illness and you don't know if it's a part of the family history. You don't know anything about yourself because legally you're not allowed to know who your father is. This was done a lot, and this was done in a period where a lot of Danish men came to Greenland to modernize it, as they call it. So we have 2 running cases where Greenlandic citizens are suing the Danish state because they are aware of their human rights. And many more will come forward because we are aware of our human rights and we are aware of our word. So this is not simply a case of a form of former colonialism. This is a systemic indicator of colonial ways of life that are still ongoing in the state of Denmark. So if we're to quote Shakespeare or paraphrase him, there's something fishy about the state of Denmark.
I find it powerful that you're using also knowledge that has in many ways been created by modern nation states also to identify the violations created by them, perpetuated by them, using power in their own game to combat it, even though that is using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house in many ways. But it's interesting to see what strategies you can use to dismantle and shift and share power. But one of the things that we talk about with power is often that it is a struggle. The examples that Kiviak is mentioning, they require us to confront a lot of discomfort, violence, historical and present. But then it also makes that some people will shut down. They will not enter conversations of sharing power when it is uncomfortable. People don't like to be uncomfortable, ignoring the fact that the discomfort exists for so many groups all the time. But I am curious, because Ferdinand, we talked about how there can be strategies to get people to willingly share power or to get people in position to share their power. And I was wondering if you could share with us some of those strategies that you work with to compel people to shift their behavior so that they will share power.
I can try at least, but I would like to get back to your pictures. Lubna, you talked about a cake and you talked about the chairs around the table. So I think it's really an interesting question to reflect on what is power sharing if you use those examples. So does it mean that the cake stays the same or the cake gets bigger? Is it power sharing? Not really. Or if you have a table, so sharing power then for me does not mean that you just put another chair on the table, but that you really need to give up your chair. Otherwise, you're not really sharing power, but you're just getting in other people, which is a good strategy to be more diverse and get more perspectives on some topics, but that's not power sharing as I understand it. So getting back to your question again, of course, power sharing is a struggle. It's not really fun. And I think you just need to be aware of that of course you're giving up something if you share power. But the strategy is still to get people to share their power is probably to tell them, even if you give up something, there might come some benefits with it as well. And that's my personal conviction. So I think it's just like that. And I will try to give you some examples from my foundation. So for instance, we have a big network as an organization. If I share this network with others, my network won't get smaller, but it actually will get bigger. So it doesn't do any harm to myself if I share that network, as one example. Or reputation. We really have a very good reputation. We can be kind of a door opener also for other people or group. Marginalized groups, intersectional marginalized groups. So if I do that, that doesn't do any harm to me. I actually would say it even improves my reputation towards the target groups that I would never reach, but my new partners in that new network just managed to bring me closer to that groups. And third example, yes, you talked about the money aspect, and yes, we are a funding organization, so of course money does play a role. But for instance, if I have €1 million to spend on a project, I could do that myself, or I just give it to partners, other organizations in the field that actually do know what they need to do. I often just have a guess, but they're just very much closer to the target group. So I would think it's the same amount of money, but by sharing that money or even giving it to other organizations, the impact will be much bigger. Again, this, of course, is a struggle. So I remember quite well the first time we have kind of committees deciding on where our funding is going to. And the first time I decided myself that I don't want to be part of the committee, but it's just other people. Oh my gosh, that was a struggle because they took decisions I would not have taken. And it was a struggle, really. But in the end of the day, I felt like it was the right decision and the impact will be much bigger than if I would have decided on it.
Thank you. I do want to try to connect your reflection now of the struggle, but it being beneficial also to what Kiviok was talking about regarding this lawsuit. Just to connect it to how, what do you think is the incentive of the Greenlandic state to confront these violations and give up the, or to face what's been going on instead of suppressing them and risk losing some power in the process? What would make them want to do that? Did you catch my question, Kiviok?
Oh yeah, sorry, I was lagging a bit.
Oh.
Yeah, here we have to think about it in a context where there's also a disconnect between what a state wants as a government versus what the citizens of that state wants. We see it all over the world where you see citizens demonstrate against war and against genocide, while their governments are supporting the genocide and the war in various places in the world. So there is definitely a lack of power amongst the citizens all over the world compared to their governments. So we also have to remind ourselves that we are the people who elect these governments. We are the ones who give them the power. I famously said last year to Aslak that if your government isn't doing anything for you, you should get a new one. You should overthrow that government. It sounds really violent and it sounds really bad when you say it exactly that way. But if your government that you elected isn't doing what they promised to do, then are they truly your government? That is another thing. We as citizens, we have to remember that we are able to do more than simply like a comment on Facebook. We can do so much more.
Absolutely.
So it is very much where we should be able to organize ourselves in a way where we use the tools that are already existing, and if they don't work, that's when we combine them with our ways of knowing, our ways of seeking information. If we don't trust the state, and otherwise to basically tell the rest of the world what is going on, like I'm telling you guys, because Denmark has since pre-World War II done a lot to brand themselves as a good nation, as the best nation. And at the time after the Second World War, they tried to say that they were the best of the colonial powers, that they were kind of nice to us in Greenland. And now they're trying to do the same to the rest of the world, where they say, we are the leaders in the green transition. We are the ones who will save you. We're the ones who will be there for you. So for them, their image is extremely important. So one of the ways we were able to even get any traction whatsoever on these cases was actually to go global, to go on BBC and CNN and talk about these issues, so that because they did not care to be completely transparent, they did not care about this before the rest of the world got involved. So sometimes, unfortunately, we have to basically shame the Danish government to do something.
It's a very...
So we have many options, but they don't always work.
Right. Disrupting power is a big task, and I think image is definitely one where you can hit large power, whether it's a benevolent imperialist, but I'm also considering in the context of labor, where you organize, Lubna, where you try to disrupt power structures, and you try to implement certain principles for power sharing. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about the explicit principles that you work with, and maybe give some examples from how you do that in the context of labor, which is a bit smaller of a context than the nation state that Kiviyok is toppling right now.
Yeah, and I think it's much easier, really, if you keep it smaller, to actually have some impact and some results that you can build on, instead of what I've been saying before, the systematic structural issues. So I'm not... I don't want to sound like we've already have it down and we know exactly how it works. Because we don't. This is also a lab, we are exploring in our bubble that we are building within that system that we are still part of. So it is not always that easy. But we are trying really to imagine a different kind of future. And I think this is what also comes down to power sharing. It's like, in the future, do I want everything to be exactly the way it is, but just with a little bit more color on it? Or am I able to imagine something completely different that is really built on social justice for everybody? And that is not always easy to do. And how can I contribute to that vision now? We are trying to build different decision-making models. We have a team, we have memberships, and we have a bigger network. So how to involve everyone in different aspects of decision-making. And I'm saying it's not always so easy because we are still part of the system. I'm the owner of this organization. So legally, I'm the one who's binding, who has the responsibility and so what. I cannot just say, well, the members decided this, and therefore it's not on me. So we are still part of this system, and how can we change it while creating this bubble? So a lot of things stay really just in our space. So just for everyone to understand, we have an intersectional co-working space that is exclusively for women, trans, inter, and non-binary people of color. And we are trying to dismantle this, dismantle, it's big words, but patriarchy, capitalism, colonialism in workspaces and in labor markets, because we always have the same people in power positions. And even if we talk about diversity and inclusion in workplaces, it usually starts on very low, the low level, and the higher up you get in an organization, it becomes more homogeneous, white, cis heterosexual men. So how to disrupt this? And we start with ourselves. We start by questioning the inherited systems that we have. We are, how are we creating power in our organizations? Does everyone feel safe in this safer space, really? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, and then we're trying to address it. Why is that? Why do we don't have or a few members with disabilities, for example? We don't have a wheel-accessible toilet, for example. That comes back to money. So money is sometimes really important for marginalized people, and so on. So how can we do that in a smaller scale? How can we give up the chair, like you've said before? I like that. Give up the chair. But that is still, for me, we keep the table as it is, we keep the system as it is, and just someone else sits on that chair and makes the same decisions. I like to get completely rid of that. So how can everyone just sit on the floor and there's enough space for everybody to just have a seat there. Yeah, so that's how we do it. We really include the ones who are in the center of whatever topic, whatever decision making we need to do, to let them take the lead. One example.
One example sounds like a good example, and it sounds also quite pleasant or friendly and something that we want to be a part of. But sometimes when we try to shift these systems of power, we have to build coalitions. And in these coalitions, we might have conflict sometimes. And I really like this idea that conflict is not abuse, but it will arise when we form these coalitions. But in that process, we might risk losing some allies. We might lose people who think, I came here for a home and for safety, and then this is challenging me, this is changing my identity, this is changing the hierarchy that I know. So I'm going to pose this question to all of you, because we're getting close towards the end, even though it went to Kiviok first. Because I'm wondering how power sharing changes your identity in this coalition building. What does it do to you in the hierarchy that you know when you start sharing power? So Kiviok will start, but you will only get a minute, Kiviok. And then I want to hear from the rest of you as well, what it does change with your identity.
Well, firstly, I wanted to address the part that when you give money directly to someone, yes, it might have more value there. But in Greenland, it actually has the opposite, because we have to import everything. So we need more money to have the same kind of value, to be able to have food and hotels. And the reason why I'm not with you guys, because my transport was too expensive. So I am here in online. So money is immensely important. And when it comes to this power structure, I think it's very important to remember that even though I've had a lot of rhetoric where I now say that there's a lot of tension between Denmark and Greenland, the reason Greenland have also gained so much internationally and have been part of the coalition of indigenous peoples who have co-created the Permanent Forum for Indigenous Peoples' Rights, the Declaration for Indigenous Peoples' Rights, the Convention for Indigenous Peoples' Rights, many other things such as the Arctic Council were co-created by indigenous people from Greenland. We did this in collaboration with many people in Denmark. And one of the world's very first, if not the very first, International Indigenous Peoples Conference was held in Copenhagen. So it is true that power sharing leads to immense powerful things. We see the results already now, that when we do take aside the bad blood that can be there and decide to work together, we can create amazing things, and we have, and we will.
Thank you. Thank you. I was wondering if the last two of you briefly would reflect on how this power sharing changes your identity when the hierarchies also change. We'll start with you, Ferdinand.
I'm not sure if it changes my identity, actually. I would say I feel much more responsible since I started reflecting on power sharing, because I know I'm privileged in many ways. I'm a white guy, PhD, I have the right name, stuff like that. So that helps a lot, of course. And I can't really change that. So that's just me. So I would say I will stay same, but just being aware of my responsibility that comes with it. That's maybe something that changes, actually. Yeah.
Thank you. What about you, Lubna?
Yeah, I think something similar. It does not really change who I am, but it changes my position in my community. And I think this is also what Kiviok said before, away from this individualism and more into this communal decision-making. So it changes really my perspective on, while making decisions, sharing whatever power everybody has, really thinking of what is the community going to benefit from instead of what I am going to benefit, or what am I going to benefit from this outcome.
Thank you. Just to round us out, I want the people in the room to feel like, oh, I got this one great thing out of coming to this talk today, hopefully more. But having practical tips for how to disrupt power in the spaces that you hold influence. Just a short tip. One of the things that I do is when I come into a room with powerful people, often suit-clad men, I like to sit at the place at the table that doesn't seem like it's for me. At the head of the table, I like putting my leg up. I like trying to disrupt the space of the room in one way or another to not seem to conform to the power structures that are there. I'm wondering if either, or if any of, if some of you, or if you all would share a tip or something you do to disrupt power in the space that you're in, that the audience can take with them.
Well, I can also say, like, finding people, again, not be alone in this, finding allies, finding people who do look like you to join you in this disrupting images or power. So together it's less scary.
What about you, Kiviok? What's one thing that you do to disrupt power? One of the many.
When it's not really a disrupt power, because just by existing, I keep disrupting Danish colonial ways. But it's also the fact that it might sound a little corny. Whenever I go into a room and I feel alone, again, all the black-clad white men, or any man in general, and feeling like, oh, I have to do this, I have to put my armor on. I don't necessarily do that anymore because I know I'm never alone because I have my ancestors, their knowledge with me, and I have my descendants within me already. So I'm never alone. So that kind of realization gives you the feeling of not only self-confidence but also self-worth that gives you the ability to talk back to some of these men. And for me, that is extremely important because as Indigenous people, our self-worth has been stripped away from us for generations. And it's only now, the last couple of years, that many of us have gained it back. So I think it's always very important to remind yourself that you are never alone and you are worthy of being a part of that table. And also to be able to destroy that table if you need to. So I'm very much with Lubna on that one.
Destroy the table. Yeah. What about you, Ferdinand, to wrap us up?
I just would say, be honest, that it's not always fun sharing power, but in the end it will make the world a better place for anyone. So I'm not sure if that does impress them very much, to put it like Shania Twain did. That don't impress me much. Yeah, well, I don't know, but still, to me it's true.
Well, that's great. Shania Twain, ancestors and allies. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming today to listen. Come up and talk to us if you feel like it. Thank you, Kiviok. Thank you, Lubna. Thank you, Fabio.
Thank you.